Foreign Minister Cho Hyun held a press conference with members of the foreign media to touch upon matters between Seoul and Washington, as well as those related to global peace and stability. Hello, welcome. Hope you had a good weekend. It's Monday, September 22nd here in Seoul, and you're watching Press Perspective. Now, today we touch upon the latest developments on the diplomatic front, as shared by Foreign Minister Cho Hyun and more. For this, I freelance journalist Raphael Rashid here in the studio. Raphael, it's great to have you here.
Thank you for having me again.
I also have Professor Choi Hyun Jin at Kyung Hee University. Joining our talk virtually, Professor Choi, as always, it's a pleasure.
Good evening, Sony.
Right, we will start here in the studio. Raphael, so Foreign Minister Cho Hyun held his foreign press conference last Friday, I believe, to share his thoughts on a wide range of international issues. First, could you walk us through the issues addressed then?
Sure. So Foreign Minister Cho Hyun had his press conference, and he did cover quite a lot of, diplomatic agenda, reflecting a lot of the kind of complex challenges that are already facing the Lee Jae-myung administration over the past 100 days since taking office. The main, I think, what dominated the discussion at the press conference that I was actually attending was the Georgia detention raid issue. The foreign minister confirmed that Seoul is launching a formal investigation into alleged human rights violations that affected the Koreans who were detained over there, of course. And he acknowledged that the detentions, he said that they did happen during law enforcement of U.S. domestic law. So he did acknowledge that, that he can't prevent that. But also emphasized that Korea's duty at the end of the day is to protect its own citizens, its own nationals, where rights have been violated. US-Korea relations was also mentioned and discussed several times. Of course, the ongoing visa issue and trade disputes, trade tensions. So Cho, he revealed that they had established a working group with Secretary of State Rubio to address the visa issue that came out of this raid in Georgia. But he did mention that these are not necessarily preconditions for Korea's promised investment commitments in the hundreds of billions of dollars. China also emerged as one of the themes. He expressed confidence that Xi Jinping would be coming to the APEC summit happening next month. Japan issues were also raised, defending the administration's pragmatic approach, noting that, of course, Korea has historical issues or grievances, but that should not derail from kind of practical cooperation between the two sides. And then on North Korea, he confirmed Seoul's continued emphasis on dialogue despite Pyongyang's unresponsive stance or cold shoulder, as Lee Jae-myung put it the other day. He also brought up Russia, mentioned that Seoul doesn't have any current plans to slap on additional sanctions, but said that they were basically monitoring the situation given North Korea's military alliance with Moscow. I guess on a final point, when it comes to Russia, he did mention that he's open to some kind of Russia playing a mediating role when it comes to issues on the Korean Peninsula. This is, of course, after we saw the National Assembly Speaker, Woo Won-sik, who was told by Putin the other day that maybe Putin could play a kind of mediating role. So I think South Korea is open to that. But again, kind of to wrap up, many complex challenges already facing this administration.
Right, complex challenges. Staying with that then, Professor Choi, the foreign minister, he also claimed that the new administration had faced an unpredictable international landscape during its first 100 days in office. If I were to ask you to point to two main factors perhaps behind the unpredictability for South Korea, Professor Choi, what would you choose to highlight?
Yes, I agree with Minister Cho that South Korea is facing a very unpredictable international landscape. If I had to say two sources of unpredictability, I would say the following. The first one is very strong and unpredictable leadership of Donald Trump. Uh, President Trump is showing a very bold and unconventional approach to diplomacy. As Raphael just noted, there was a large-scale immigration crackdown in Georgia, where the hundreds of South Korean engineers and workers were detained, and some of them were actually arrested in chains. And many in South Korea felt very uncomfortable and also angry, and they felt that the United States, especially the Trump administration, is not really respecting South Korea. And what is more concerning is that the President Trump has asked Korean government to invest up to $350 billion, mostly in cash. And also the 90% of the profit from this investment will be taken by the United States. So this is extremely high amount, and the one that could put major pressure on South Korean economy and also business community. So that is the big source of unpredictability. And the second source is the growing tension between the United States and China. The South Korea has maintained close ties with both countries in reality. And so we are relying on the United States for security and technology, and also we need China for trade and also regional peace in Korean Peninsula. But however, as the rivalry between the two great powers intensify, the South Korean diplomatic balancing is becoming more difficult. So Minister Cho's recent visit to Beijing shows that the Seoul is trying to manage both relationships very carefully. So in short, South Korea needs a very smart and flexible diplomacy to protect our national interests in this growingly divided and unpredictable world.
Right. And before we touch upon Foreign Minister Cho Hyun's sit down with his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi, Raphael, I'd like to go back to that press conference. Now, like you mentioned, Foreign Minister Cho, he fielded quite a number of questions with regard to the raging wars in Ukraine and Gaza. I am aware that not much was shared. Do correct me if I'm wrong, but based on his brief responses, what can we assume about South Korea's stance with regard to these issues of international concern, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of reiterating what Professor Choi just said, it's all about this diplomatic balancing act. On Gaza, one journalist specifically asked, you know, is he willing to call what's happening in Gaza a genocide? And would South Korea be willing to recognize Palestine as a state? The Minister Cho, he basically said that he'd spoken to both the Palestinian and Israeli foreign ministers within days of each other. He described the situation in Gaza as truly heartbreaking, but he crucially avoided this kind of legal characterization, saying that these things take time to define events legally. So I think this suggests that Seoul wants to avoid the genocide kind of determination, kind of the wording that UN bodies are now using and international observers are also using at the moment. And regarding Palestinian statehood recognition, Cho reaffirmed Korea's long-standing support for a two-state solution, but stopped short at this kind of immediate recognition. Of course, this comes, we saw just yesterday, the UK, Canada, and also Australia saying that they recognize the Palestinian state. I think, of course, South Korea will always be in between bigger powers, maybe aware of maybe the United States' stance. But again, I think Cho's responses revealed Seoul's commitment to this kind of strategic ambiguity that we have seen, not just in this administration, but other administrations as well, kind of trying to maintain kind of diplomatic relevance when needed. And also, again, this word that we keep on seeing time and time again, the Lee administration's pragmatic diplomacy. So engaging substantially or substantively without necessarily taking sides that could jeopardize Korea's broader strategic interests. At the same time, we did actually see the Ministry of Foreign Affairs last week condemn Israel's attack on Qatar. They called it an unacceptable act violating territorial sovereignty. And so I think it shows that Korea is willing to criticize maybe specific events or issues, but also avoiding kind of broader legal or political judgments. So I think this overall, I think this suggests that, again, Korea is trying to maintain constructive relationships with all related parties, but also avoiding anything that could compromise its position, and especially in this growing world where we have a lot of polarization. And I think some people might say this is very clever and strategic of Lee Jae-myung. Some people might say it's unrealistic and that he should be, or the Korean government should be taking sides. But right now, it's a very delicate balancing act. But it remains to be seen, if he can maintain this balancing act for the entire 5-year tenure of his administration.
Right. Professor Choi, this next question might be a bit of a tricky one, but speaking purely within your capacity, of course, as a scholar, just as a scholar, what are your thoughts with regard to South Korea's obligations to arrest Russia's Vladimir Putin under an international criminal court warrant should he attend the APEC leaders meeting in the city of Gyeongju this autumn? I mean, where should South Korea's priorities lie?
Okay, this is a sensitive issue. It is true that President Putin is now under ICC arrest warrant for the abduction and illegal transfer of Ukrainian children during the war. And South Korea is now a member of the ICC, and that means Korea has a duty to support the ICC's legal procedure. But we need to understand also how the ICC actually works. The court has no police force of its own. So even if it issues an arrest warrant, it cannot carry out the arrest without the help of a national government. And for this reason, no sitting head of the state or even a rebel leader in power has ever been arrested by another country under an ICC warrant. Never. So if South Korea were to arrest President Putin during the APEC summit in Gyeongju, it would be the first time in history that one state detains a sitting leader of another major power under international law. And realistically, that would be seen as a declaration of war against Russia. So while I fully understand the legal and the ethical concern raised by some international community, the reality is that South Korean government is extremely unlikely even to consider such a move. I think the stakes are just too high.
Right, and staying with that, I wonder, Raphael, did you get a chance to ask Foreign Minister Cho Hyun about this issue?
Yeah, actually, I was about to butt in right now. I actually literally asked this very question to Foreign Minister Cho, assuming, because the invitation is on the table, but at the same time there are these certain legal considerations. Interestingly, Minister Cho avoided my question. He said that there were too many assumptions in the question and that he would not answer the question. So please forgive me not answering the question. And I think, again, of course, South Korea is in a very difficult position, stuck in the middle. And I think likely we'll see that diplomatically and symbolically, South Korea would have had to invite Putin, Russia being a member of APEC, but realistically, he will probably not come. Kremlin hasn't confirmed yet whether he will come, but I think the very likely thing is he won't come because it will put everyone in an awkward position.
Right. Staying with the upcoming APEC leaders meeting here in South Korea, US President Donald Trump says he'll be sitting down with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping on the sidelines of the multilateral APEC meeting here in South Korea. What do you suppose, Raphael, are the implications of this proposed summit between these two rival leaders?
Yeah, I think this represents a kind of diplomatic windfall for Seoul, transforming Korea from a summit hosting nation, into the kind of epicenter of global superpowers getting together and coming face to face. And especially now, Trump and Xi are likely, it seems, to be coming. And I think this will be the first time since around 2019, I believe. And this would be their first encounter, at least since Trump has assumed office again. Again, this is very crucial timing. The summit will open just 10 days before US-China tariff truce expires. So again, potentially making Gyeongju the venue where the two biggest, largest economies will escalate or resolve this trade conflict. And I think Korean officials will likely be, at least privately, a little bit excited about hosting what could be a pivotal moment in reshaping global economic order. I guess for South Korea specifically, this does create challenges, but also pressure, because Seoul, finds itself in the middle and basically facilitating this dialogue with these big powers, a key security partner and also the largest trading partner. And also many of the issues on the table will probably affect South Korea indirectly along the lines. But at the same time, I think this tests President Lee Jae-myung's pragmatic diplomacy strategy, because Korea will want to try to avoid appearing to favor or side with one or the other, while also potentially benefiting from any détente between the two sides. But I guess we can remain hopeful. Trump on Truth Social, his social media post, he described that he had a call with Xi Jinping and described it as very productive and with progress on many issues being made. So I think there is some momentum. And again, this will be very symbolic to have the two heads of state coming here in South Korea. And I guess the stakes, again, they extend beyond the symbolism of it all. And any agreement that could be reached could, like I say, impact South Korea's economy, so and also security environment.
Right, and staying with that then, Professor Choi, what look to be the broader diplomatic gains, if you will, for South Korea should the leaders of the US and China both attend the APEC gathering and, of course, sit on the sidelines of this multilateral meeting?
I think it is a great chance for South Korea to help reduce tension, either directly or indirectly, between the two largest countries in the world. And simply providing a neutral ground for dialogue between US and China can greatly help stabilize the broader Indo-Pacific region. And this is also important for South Korean national interests, especially given rising security and also trade tension. And at the same time, this summit would allow South Korean government to demonstrate its balanced and pragmatic foreign policy approach. The Seoul is trying to maintain a strong military alliance with the United States, but it also values a stable relation with China, which is the largest trading partner for South Korea. So hosting both leaders at the same time can show that Korea can manage both relationships carefully and responsibly. So in general, I believe the hosting both Xi Jinping and Trump in Gyeongju would greatly strengthen the soft power of South Korea.
Right. Meanwhile, Raphael, ahead of his conference with the members of the foreign press here in South Korea, Foreign Minister Cho Hyun, as we mentioned earlier, sat down with his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi in Beijing. They both reaffirmed their commitment to bilateral ties and also to peace on the Korean Peninsula. Could you tell us a bit more about their talks and your takeaways?
Yeah, I think this meeting that happened just the other day represented, I guess you'd call it a diplomatic reset, I think, after months of kind of strained relations and also under the previous administration. And Cho's visit to Beijing, I think, was also, of course, strategically timed ahead of Xi Jinping's potential or likely visit to South Korea ahead of APEC. So I think essentially it's like laying the groundwork for his visit. And also Wang Yi's welcoming tone, I think, was quite notable, and it was quite warm, emphasizing that China's Korea policy remains stable and consistent, and calling both countries to become true partners in strategic cooperation. So I think the Chinese side clearly views that the Lee government is a lot more pragmatic than its predecessors. On Korean Peninsula issues, of course, Cho pressed China to help restart this dialogue with North Korea, and Wang pledged to continue playing a constructive role for peace and stability. I guess one thing that we would note is that there was an absence of the word denuclearization in the language of China's readout, while this was present in Korea's. So I think this suggests there might be some gaps in the approaches both countries have towards Pyongyang. Of course, we all know that North Korea's stance is very clear, that they will not denuclearize, and they want everyone to stop using that word. So I think that might have played a part. There were also economic discussions. Cho acknowledged that the relationship is transitioning from a vertical division of labor to horizontal cooperation. So I think reflecting China's kind of technological advancements and the need for this new cooperation as the countries increasingly compete with one another rather than just complement each other. So I think, overall, my takeaway is that both governments do recognize the need for stable relations despite these structural tensions. And I think APEC will be providing the perfect catalyst for any engagement coming up over the next months or years.
Right, and then briefly speaking, Professor Cho, with regard to South Korea's ties with China, how should it seek to navigate these ties?
This is a very challenging question. So I'm going to introduce one just public opinion poll, because I fully agree with this public opinion poll result. So many people in Korea want to keep a strong military alliance with the United States, and they believe that this is the cornerstone of South Korean national security and also international strategy. But however, they believe that we need to maintain a stable and friendly relationship with China. And that's why they don't want Korea to get involved in, for example, a China-Taiwan conflict or any conflict in South China Sea. So this shows that Korea needs a careful and balanced foreign policy approach. We need to stay close with the United States for military security, but also talk to China and avoid unnecessary problems. I think that is a smart way forward for South Korea.
Right, I see. I shall buy a public poll here then. All right, Professor Choi, I'm afraid that's all the time we have. As always, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you very much.
Raphael, thank you very much for your time and thoughts.
Thank you.
Right, and that ends this edition of Press Perspective. Thank you for watching. See you same time tomorrow.